Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Roundup, Tuesday, July the 26th, our season premiere of the Fantasy Roundup here at bet.nola.com. Glad to be with you again. I've missed talking fantasy with my man Spencer the Guru to my right on your screen. And it's exciting times, man, for fantasy football players. It's time to pour through rankings and your analytics and whatever it is that you use to do your drafts and your auctions, because those are all coming right down the pipe. Training camps around the league have started. The last bunch of them started today, including the New Orleans Saints. We've got your fresh batch of rankings to go through today, also some rookies to watch, and some injuries to keep an eye on in training camp, which is always a huge deal. And as you just said, Spencer, we have some breaking news, which we'll get to in 1 second. Want to let everybody know, first of all, as always, we are powered by Caesars Sportsbook. And if you have not done it yet, sign up for the Caesars Sportsbook at NOLA.com/Caesars. Get your first bet risk-free up to $1,500. So you can bet a future, you can bet a prop bet, which we'll talk about some as the Fantasy Roundup rolls on this year. Or you can even bet pretty much any NFL game throughout the entire season already has a betting line up on Caesars. So check that out, NOLA.com/Caesars. Spencer, first of all, before we get to the breaking news, how excited are you for a new season of fantasy football?
Oh, yeah, very excited, Zach. I've already been doing my research, getting these rankings ready, looking to see which rookies are on the rise, how the injured players do, and players coming off injuries. Always a big thing to monitor. But, yeah, man, just really excited to get into this thing. Football, hot and heavy, just around the corner. Only a few more days till August. And, of course, training camp getting going. So, yeah, this is it, man. This is the time to really start diving deep into this fantasy football stuff. This is where it's time to get the rankings pretty much set in stone. I got to make adjustments here and there with various news, but this is where you got to get your rankings pretty firm, because you want to go in the draft night knowing what you're going to do. You don't want to be, not having a good firm plan. You want to be prepared and not be the drunken fool at the draft. You want to go in there and draft a nice team. Yes.
You have to have a plan. You don't want to be the guy or gal who sits there in the 7th round and says, "Is Derrick Henry still available?
Yeah,
I didn't
don't
check
be
him
that
off."
guy.
And you're like, "No, come on, it's the 7th round. Derrick Henry's gone." Oh, okay. Well, then I don't know. And they start pouring through their magazine or whatever. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy.
No, that's why y'all just here on the Fantasy Roundup. Right. Y'all don't be like that.
Have a plan. And by the way, the NFL anymore doesn't really have an offseason. I'm not going to exaggerate and say there is no offseason in fantasy football, but sometimes it feels that like you got to monitor free agency. You got to look at the draft. You got to look at training camps, mini camps, who's holding out, who's getting hurt. The more information you have, the more successful you're going to be at this.
Yeah, I mean, we probably could have made this a year-round show, because I've been feeling like year-round tracking it. Like after the Super Bowl, not long after that free agency opened with all the receivers moving, he had huge fantasy implications, as well as a lot of quarterbacks on the move. And it seems like with each offseason, there's more and more player movement, with players becoming more empowered to want to call their own shots and contracts, having more wiggle room. So yeah, it's just getting crazier about a year. And so with that, you gotta be even more prepared than usual. It's not like the old days where you can just pull up a cheat sheet and a lot of the guys are still the same from the year before. It's a lot of changes, with guys changing teams and the amount of injuries. It's wild, but yep. we got y'all covered.
Well, that's why we're here, to feed you that information, to tell you what it means. And our first instance of doing that comes right now. You had some breaking news, Spencer.
Yep, Julio Jones just signed a deal with Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Saints fans aren't going to want to hear that. Julio already
not that guy again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he gave us trouble with the damn Falcons. Now he's back in the division. I don't know how I feel about it, though. I mean, it obviously helps Tom Brady, but I don't think it's not like this is the old Julio. I mean, this version of Julio is a lot older, a lot more injury prone. Seems like he'll probably pull a hamstring by mid-season, so I wouldn't stress out too much from a Saints fan perspective. But for fantasy, this signing, I think this signing is kind of telling about Chris Godwin's status. This tells me that Chris Godwin's probably not going to be ready for week 1. So I'm thinking they're going to ease him along and then have Julio early, and then they figure, well, by the time Julio pulls his hamstring, we should have Godwin back.
And that, my friends, is what we call in the industry a tease, because we are going to talk some injuries later this season and later in this show, excuse me, and Chris Godwin's name may or may not be on that list. And we'll dive into what his status could be and what that means. First of all, we're going to get to some rankings, though. We did have a few off-season shows here on the Fantasy Round. We talked some fantasy basketball, fantasy baseball, fantasy golf. But in this particular case, we're talking football rankings. And Spencer, you've updated your rankings. These are the current ones. We're going to start with quarterbacks. And the guy at the top, I think pretty unanimous, Josh Allen. It does get interesting after that, how you rank kind of 2 through, let's say 6, because any of those guys, and you throw in the rushing yards for Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray, you could have an argument that those are the guys you want to target after Allen. I think most people would say Herbert, Mahomes, Burrow are going to get enough passing production to surpass those two guys. But how you order them, that's where we get into an argument.
Yeah, a lot of people I notice have Lamar and Kyler over Burrow, but I prefer Burrow because I feel like Burrow hadn't even reached his ceiling yet. With the improved offensive line, I'm thinking Burrow's stats go up even more this year. Some people aren't feeling him as much, since he had another knee injury in the Super Bowl. So I mean, his knees aren't the best, obviously, but he's just such a gamer. I feel like he's the kind of guy that he can play through pain. He's got a high pain tolerance. He's somebody that's just determined to make his mark. I mean, hell, he led the Bengals to the freaking Super Bowl last year, a team that had no business being there. So they're going to be better this year. And where we caught Lamar and Kyler, though, I think will be better than last year. Last year they were both banged up, missed some games, kind of inconsistent. Where this year, though, I think they'll be close. Them Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar, Kyler all in the mix there. I think Herbert, though, I know Jim disagreed with me yesterday, but I think Herbert's the clear number 2 and could push Josh Allen for that top spot. I know he doesn't have the rushing upside of Josh, but he's the real deal. And I tell you what, he's the guy with, speaking of futures, that I might go put a little something on the win MVP, because I see Justin Herbert throwing for 5,000 plus yards and possibly leading the Chargers to the division title.
Wow. And I mean, one thing about the Chargers is the way that their offense runs. Like, look, when they are trying to establish the run, quote unquote, which is the cliche, they don't always hand the ball off to Austin Eckler. Or Josh Jackson. A lot of times those are passes. And so the short passing game can kind of do the same thing as establishing the run. It gets the defense to suck up a little bit. But guess what? Justin Herbert's still getting points for those. If Austin Eckler takes one to the house from 35 yards out, yes, that's a reason to draft Austin Eckler, but it's also a reason Justin Herbert's getting points for that. So even when they're running the ball, to your point, he's kind of racking up those yards. Now, as we move further down the list here, I have to say I'm embarrassed. I typed these in and I put Russell Wilson Seattle without even thinking about it. That's my first error of the year. So Russell Wilson obviously in Denver, not in Seattle anymore. What do you make of his move? And then the guy right above him, Dak Prescott. These are two guys who are a little polarizing in the fantasy world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned Russ, because up on bet.nola.com, we've got our Denver Broncos fantasy outlook. So if it was wondering about Russ, we got it all broken down in there. And basically, I feel like the deal with Russ is that, going to Denver, it's not going to cause his numbers to go up astronomically, but I think they'll go up enough to where he'll be back as a solid top 10 quarterback, because last year in Seattle, he struggled. Even when, I know he missed some games, but even when he was healthy, he had his worst statistical season, I believe, since his rookie year. And so I think in Denver, he'll have a nice renaissance resurgence type season and could even exceed this ranking of 9. And then Dak Prescott there, I think Dak's pretty steady. I feel like you know what you're getting with Dak. It's a pretty stable system. They throw a lot over there, and yeah, it's just pretty steady. But man, Tom Brady, I had moved down a little bit with Rob Gronkowski retiring, but now with the Julio Jones sign, and I might have to move Brady back up. I had him at 8. I might have to move him back up now, because this Julio signing definitely gives him a boost, at least early on, with possibly not having Godwin.
Yeah. Listen, the weapons make all the difference in the world for a fantasy quarterback. If you don't have them, you got to be downgraded. And that, Patrick Mahomes, again, how much will he miss Tyreek Hill? I guess I'm going to still take a chance on him if the price is right. I think you mentioned yesterday, we were talking about the Chiefs. Like, look, if he slips to the 5th round in your draft where he was going in the 2nd or 3rd round last year, you got to consider that. Depending on the makeup of your team, the structure of your team, what else you have going on. But again, it is a risk. It is a risk. All right, let's move on to running backs. By the way, if you have a question, and we did get, I think we're getting one in the comments here, drop it in the comments. Spencer is here to help. And in fact, let's go to that question because it's a doozy. All right, so Regier Productions in a 32-man dynasty league. I'd like to know exactly how that works because you basically have that's every player rostered, pretty much every starting player rostered in the NFL. But that's a very deep league. Offered to trade second, third, and fourth round next year with a second, third, and fourth the following year, and he gives up Hunter Renfrow. So he basically is getting draft picks a year early and giving up Hunter Renfrow. I would say it's Spencer. I'll let you answer, but it's difficult to say without knowing the construction of your roster. How much are you missing Hunter Renfrow in a 32-team league? That guy is pretty valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it just kind of comes down to how do you feel about your team this year? Like if you feel, because in a 32-man league, that's one of those things. If you feel your window is now to win, you've got to take advantage of that because I'm sure there's a lot of awful ebbs and flows as far as some years you're among the contenders and other years you've got to rebuild. And let's see, his other receivers, Mike Evans, DeAndre. Okay, yeah, honestly, man, if you feel like you're in win now mode, because if you trade Renfrow, that's basically you're punting that second receiver spot. And to me, I couldn't swing it. I know you're getting a lot of picks, but unless you feel like you need a rebuild, I'm keeping Renfrow because Renfrow is a quality piece. And in a 32-team league, it's not like you're going to find anything off the waiver wire. So I'd probably just keep him unless you feel it's just you need to rebuild and restructure.
I mean, the other point I would raise is for this year's draft, when you're looking at rookies, who is available? What pick do you have? Are you targeting a wide receiver in that draft to where if you could get a Treylon Burks or a Chris Olave or one of these top rookie wide receivers to replace Hunter Renfrow, maybe it's easier to part with him. It depends a little bit on your situation. On the other hand, if you also need a running back and you're targeting a running back in your draft this year, might want to hang on to Renfrow, especially if, as Spencer says, you're in win now mode. Speaking of running backs, again, pretty clear cut number one here, and the arguments are going to begin after that. Jonathan Taylor, number one for the Colts, had a fantastic year last year. A lot of the guys that follow him, I would say Najee Harris, not so much, but all the way down to number 6, Derrick Henry, you have injury questions. If you could guarantee these guys would play 16 or 17 games, they'd be higher, but I don't think you can do that.
Yeah, the running back position's always tough, but I feel like it's one of those situations where you've got to roll the dice if you have the early pick, especially in the single quarterback formats where running backs are still king. So yeah, it's just tough though because a lot of these guys have concerns. I feel like JT and Najee are the clear cut top two because they don't really have many concerns. They're both young. They stayed healthy last year. I feel like they'll both play almost every game this year. Eckler and CMC, not as much with the major injury. Those things, them and Cook are all with the nagging stuff. Henry, though, coming off the major foot injury, came back for the playoff game, but wasn't quite as explosive in that playoff game. So we'll have to see if he can regain that or if he's just going to be on a decline. I think, though, that he'll, at least in the first half of this year, do pretty well there and it'd be a solid RB1. But they're all a little risky to where you wouldn't be crazy. To me, the top two, I mean, I'm bigger on Najee than most. To me, he should be the second pick. But once you have that 3 spot, I wouldn't be opposed to going with a Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson there because of the way these running backs are so injury prone.
Yeah, I mean, one strategy that's out there, especially if you can't get one of the top 2, 3, if you want to take a risk, say the top 6 guys, is the 0 RB strategy, where you don't really draft any starting running backs. You use your early picks, you stock your wide receiver room, you get a good tight end, you get a good quarterback, and then you come back and you grab some, like, let's say, second string running backs that aren't really second string. Tony Pollard in Dallas, Melvin Gordon in Denver, Michael Carter for the Jets. Guys who aren't necessarily starters, who aren't going to be taken until the 8th, 9th, 10th round, but could end up being starters halfway through the year. And now if that happens, you've got a stacked wide receiver room and you've got a good running back room and you can win leagues that way. It is a risk, though. How do you feel about a zero RB strategy, Spencer?
Yeah, it is risky. I've tried it before. A guy that I did it with and that I actually felt pretty good about my team afterwards was AJ Dillon. AJ Dillon is my RB1, and people thought I was crazy, but my receiver room was loaded. I remember my first two picks were Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs, and I was like, yeah, AJ Dillon, he's not up there with those top guys, but he's somebody that's, I feel like, got a stable floor, being that it's basically a 50-50 split now with him and Aaron Jones. And if something would happen to Aaron Jones at that point, A.J. Dillon's an RB1, and you're getting him at a lot cheaper draft price than those elite options. And then you have the elite receivers locked in with Adams and Diggs, who I know nothing's a guarantee in the NFL, but those guys are about as safe of picks as you can ask for. They usually play all the games. Also, it was 60, now 17 games. So, yeah, no, I'm not opposed to that. I wouldn't say jump at that because, I'll say Dillon's one of the few I like. If you don't get Dillon and it's like, who do you get? There's just not a whole lot of guys I like as far as that zero RB thing. Like Pollard makes me a little nervous. I guess Pollard as a second wouldn't be bad. I've had Pollard as a second before when I waited on running back. So it's worth a try depending on how the draft flows. Don't force it. Don't go into your draft being like, oh, I'm doing zero RB for sure. But if there's like a run, if you have like the 10th or 11th pick and it's all running backs and go in front of you, then yeah, go ahead and take the receiver, take the Cooper Kupp, take the value. And if you have to do zero RB, then go ahead, because at the end of the day, it's all about the best value in these drafts rather than some certain strategy as far as positions. Just get the best guys. And if it's, if your RB1's not quite as strong, it's all good because your elite receivers will be outscoring the other team's receivers.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. It depends on how the draft goes or the auction. If the running backs are going off the board, they're super expensive early. Or like you said, you have the number 3 pick. You decide Cooper Kupp is a safer bet than any of the running backs at that point. And now in a 12-team league, you're not picking again until number 22. So all of the elite running backs will be gone by the time you come back around. Maybe you do use a couple more picks on wide receivers. Go zero RB. For those who are newcomers, zero RB does not mean you literally don't take running backs. It just means you're not taking any guys who are listed, say, in the top 15 or 20 of the rankings. You're going to kind of speculate. You're going to take some chances, buy some stocks low, and hope that by halfway through the season, one of those guys becomes the Michael Carter of last year for the Jets. He's a perfect example, a guy who was drafted like in the 12th, 13th, 14th round in most drafts last year, and he got hurt. But before that, he had turned into a borderline RB1. And so you can really make hay with that strategy. What you're doing is betting on the opposite of these guys who are going to take Christian McCaffrey or Derrick Henry or Austin Eckler and hope they don't get hurt and say, well, this is a great pick if he stays healthy. Well, if he doesn't, you have the handcuff, and now you have a much better situation on your roster because you took receivers so high. So yeah, I mean, it's a strategy that's out there. I think it can make sense. It does depend on your situation.
Yeah, I feel like if you have an early pick, like if you have like one of those 1 through 6, to me, a strategy that it's a trendy strategy that's making sense to me that I need to try it out because it makes a hero RB, it's called, where you take one elite running back with your first round pick, and then with the rest of your picks, just stack up on receivers like your 2nd through 5th round picks. Just stack receivers with those, and then have your RB2 not be quite as strong, but you've got that, that elite running back to carry you, because as long as you have that one elite running back, the RB2 spot sometimes can be filled on the waiver wire. I mean, look at last year, you had like Elijah Mitchell, Cordell Patterson, Rashad Penny at the end of the year. A lot of times you can find those kind of waiver wire darlings for one spot. You don't want to have both spots being vulnerable. If you have one spot that's locked in, like if you can get Jonathan Taylor, take a bunch of receivers, and then hopefully get your RB2 in the middle rounds or maybe even on waivers, I could see that being the move. Because I mean, if you have that first pick, you don't want to go zero RB because you don't want to pass up on the likes of JT or Najee.
Yeah, I agree. I won the league last year where I took Joe Mixon with my 2nd round pick. Actually, my 1st round pick was Devontae Adams. And then I didn't take another running back. I may have told the story. My draft was the night of Hurricane Ida. And so after my first 2 picks, the power went out. And I had preset rankings because I knew that was a possibility. And so I wasn't totally high and dry. But this is the problem with auto drafting, right? If the power goes out, no cell phone service, my rounds 3 through 9 were either wide receivers or quarterbacks. The
So
computer
it
didn't
gave
take
you
another running
it
back
basically
for me.
did the hero
So I
RB
had
for
to,
you.
yeah. And guess what? I won the league because what I had done was I pumped Jamar Chase way up in my rankings. So I ended up with Devontae Adams and Jamar Chase. And I believe I had, I'm forgetting my third wide receiver, but he was also real good. And then
Didn't you have
my
Cooper
running,
Kupp?
yeah, it wasn't Cooper Kupp, but
Oh, okay.
my running backs were mixing, and then I just had to kind of rotate as the year went on between Michael Carter, whom I mentioned, Melvin Gordon, and eventually was able to swing a trade for David Montgomery because he gets hurt, and that left that owner desperate and was able to make a trade for a couple of guys and got David Montgomery, stashed him on IR, and that's who I ended the year with, and so I was able to win my championship that way. So it is possible. Got a question here before we move on to receivers from Elliot Gidry, a 10-team PPR keeper league. He can keep Michael Thomas in the 6th or Patty Mahomes in the 7th. I know my answer, Spencer, but you go ahead.
Yeah, this one's easy for me. To me, you got to keep Mahomes. I mean, elite quarterbacks like that don't grow on trees, and you're getting him cheaper than Michael Thomas, who's coming off major ankle surgery. We don't know if he's going to be 100%. Even if he is, what if he re-injures it? What if he doesn't have the confidence to cut like he used to and be his elite self? So yeah, I'm off of Michael Thomas this year for fantasy. I hope, as a Saints enthusiast, I hope he can bounce back. But as a smart fantasy investor, I don't want any part of it. Just way too risky. Or Mahomes, that's money in the bank. Give me Mahomes in the 7th.
Yeah, I'm on board with that too. I think here's how easy that decision is for me. You could go get Michael Thomas, even if he shows that he's healthy, probably in the 5th or 6th round in a regular draft. You could not go get Patrick Mahomes in the 7th round of most drafts. So that's where the value is. Michael Thomas, look, he's got to. I don't know when your draft is, Elliot, but he's got to prove to me, number one, that he's out there and healthy and is playing. And if he can't do that before your draft date, I'm certainly not going to take him. Even if he can, I think you could probably still get him in the 6th round if you're really optimistic about Michael Thomas. You're not getting Mahomes in the 7th. So that one's easy for me. Moving on to some wide receivers. This is an interesting one, too. Cooper Kupp had one of the best seasons in the history of the NFL last year. Wide receiver. He won the wide receiving triple crown, yards, touchdowns, and receptions. But you have him at number 2, sandwiched between a couple of LSU guys.
Right. Yeah, I try to avoid drafting players coming off historic seasons. Like the year with Christian McCaffrey, that the 1,000. I didn't want to. I used to say didn't say not to draft him next year, but I wasn't like all gung ho to do it. Same thing with Michael Thomas. Like, those were extreme examples. They did horrible following their historic seasons. But even guys that even like Adrian Peterson coming off his historic season, I don't think was, he was still good the next year, but wasn't as good. So I'm thinking Cubs numbers regress for sure. He'll be among the top 5, but it's just hard for me to believe he's going to do that well again, because I feel like defenses are just, they're going to be like anybody but Cooper Kupp. They're just going to key in on Kupp, to where I feel like guys like, Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, Tyler Higbee, they're going to force the other guys to beat them, the running game. Like teams are going to really lock down on Kupp, to where I just don't see him having that kind of insane season. Where Jefferson, though, Jefferson is the clear cut number 1 on the Vikings, but I feel like they're going to be doing some new things this year with Kevin O'Connell as their head coach, getting him out in the space more, stretching the field, and Adam Thielen on the opposite side of him, where they can't completely double team him. And so I'm thinking Jefferson is in line for an elite season. And same for Chase. I'm just not quite as high on Chase because he doesn't have quite as stable of a receptions floor. And then he's got T. Higgins on the opposite of him, who's also a top 10 receiver. So, and some weeks they kind of, one week it's a Higgins week, one week it's a Chase week. So, I still really like Jamar, but as far as the 3 out of those big 3, I'm going with Justin Jefferson, because I feel like he's got the perfect combination of stability and explosive big play ability.
Want to move further down the list here. A couple of names: Devontae Adams, new names and new places. Devontae Adams in Las Vegas, Tyreek Hill in Miami. The other one I'll bring up is AJ Brown in Philly. Who do you like best? Well, obviously you like Adams best in this new situation, but who improves from his new situation and who may slip because of his new situation?
Yeah, honestly, I think they all slipped to some degree. None of these new situations were as good as their previous situations. I mean, but Adams, I don't see slipping a whole lot. I think he'll still be top five because we going from Rodgers to Carr. It's not going to be as bad of a drop off as some are thinking. I mean, him and Carr were teammates at Fresno State. I know it's been a while since they were in college together, but they were elite in college. Yeah, that was an elite duo. I believe Adams had like 22 touchdowns is his last year there, and so he'll pick up where he left off. He'll have I think in a top 5 year. Whereas Hill, I think Hill sees the biggest drop off. Going from Mahomes to Tua. I think his numbers dip. Still be a top 10 guy, but no longer top 5. And as for AJ Brown, I don't see his numbers changing a whole lot. I think he stays about the same. Going from Tennessee, a run first offense, to Philly, another run first offense. So his concern more is his health. He's had a lot of injuries as a young player, but hopefully he can stay healthy this season. And if he does, I think he's probably got a little more upside than Hill, but it's just he's had a lot of injuries, man. He's got to stay on the field.
The news of the day: Julio Jones signing with the Bucs. Any effect at all on Mike Evans? I know you said you think that may be a sign more about the Bucs' confidence in Chris Godwin's ability to be ready for the season.
Yeah, which I had another report about Godwin, and I'm gonna have to kind of walk that back because they're saying now Chris Godwin is being cleared for training camp. So it sounds like it's one of those things where it's just Brady, man. He's just the rich get richer. People want to go play for Tom Brady. And Julio Jones, the latest example of that, man. It's just so frustrating how Brady, it's just, I mean, people just have that allure of playing for the GOAT. It's like just he can just attract free agents, man. And even though he lost Gronk, now he's got Julio. So so yeah, Mike Evans, though, I still think he'll be a borderline top 12 receiver. But yeah, now with Julio signed and then Godwin looking better, it's just going to be a lot of mouths to feed over there to where Evans is being pushed up draft boards a lot because of Gronk retiring, but second round, way too high, in my opinion. If you can get him in the third or fourth, that's not bad considering he's a double-digit touchdowns guy. Not many receivers get double-digit touchdowns, but it's just with all those other options, it's just he's not going to get the volume of like a Devontae Adams or a Cooper Kupp to be worth selecting in that, one of those like first 2 rounds worth of picks.
Spencer, the other thing in Tampa Bay is that Antonio Brown is gone as well. And so, maybe a few more targets to go around for those guys. But Julio, I mean, listen, Julio, by the way, before we came on the air, Spencer about gave me a heart attack when he said breaking news and he said Julio, and there's just the slightest pause. And I thought he was going to tell me Julio Rodriguez of my Mariners was going on the IL because he's missed the last 4 games with a sore wrist, and he's supposed to come back tonight. But I was afraid and then you said Julio Jones, and I was happy. But Julio Jones has missed 7 games each of the past 2 years. Would you take him at all in a fantasy football draft? Or maybe better question is, how deep would your league have to be before you take a late round flyer on Julio Jones?
Yeah, it would have to be really late. If we knew Godwin was going to miss the first 6 weeks or so, at that point, I'd say Julio would be worth a flyer in like the 10th or 11th round, because they also brought in Russell Gage, another ex-Falcon. So he's going to be there too, competing for targets. So with the current landscape with Godwin looking healthier and Gage in there, Julio might end up being the 4th receiver. He might not even be a starter. So it's just like, I don't even think he's really worth drafting unless you're in like a 14 team or 16 team league. To me, in your regular 12 team PPR, I mean, maybe a flyer in like the 14th or if you skip defense and kicker, maybe take him in one of those last 2 picks. But outside of that, it's easy to me. He's just not worth it because there's just like I said earlier, too many mouths to feed in Tampa Bay.
And I mean, look, it's true more at some positions than others, but the football is a young man's game. You just can't chase these old guys and expect them to come up with big seasons after it's been several years since they've been there. Quarterbacks, maybe yes, but not running backs and wide receivers. So let's move on to tight ends. By far the top 2 guys last year, Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. You have them back there. You've slotted Kyle Pitts above George Kittle, who was sort of the other big name a couple years ago, and then also Darren Waller, who was a big tight end name over the last 2 years. So I'm real high on Pitts as well, but explain your reasoning there, Spencer.
Yeah, I had to move Pitts up a little bit because with Atlanta this year, he's going to be the focal point. Like Calvin Ridley's gone for the year. I know they drafted Drake London, but outside of that, they didn't really do a whole lot at receiver. I mean, there's not much there to where I think Pitts will see a ton of targets and his touchdowns are going to go up. There's no way he only gets one touchdown like last year. I think he gets at least 6 to 8, maybe even 10. And if that's the case, he might pass up Andrews or maybe Kelsey and be the number 1 tight end. It's possible. He's got that ceiling. I'm not predicting it this year, but I definitely think he'll get there eventually. So in Dynasty, he's, to me, the clear-cut number 1 tight end. But even in redraft, for me, he's still top 3 because Kittle just had way too many injuries in recent years. He's still, even if he misses games, he'll probably still be a top 5 tight end because the position it sucks. I mean, there's just not a whole lot of reliable options, but
it is better than it was, I'd say, 3 years ago. 3 years ago, it was like Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, and a wasteland. Maybe you throw Andrews in there. It's a little deeper now.
Yeah, at least now you got like Schultz and Hawkinson. I really like Schultz for this season because Amari Cooper's out of there in Dallas and Michael Gallup's coming off a torn ACL. I think Schultz could get 1,000 yards this year. I really do. Schultz, to me, is the best value pick because to get one of those top 4 guys, you're going to have to pay a premium. Hell, even Waller a lot of times goes high. I'm not feeling Waller this year. I think Adams' addition is going to kill his statistical output to where he'll still put up numbers, but not nearly what he did without Adams, where Schultz, I think his numbers have nowhere to go but up.
All right, so to this point here on the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com, Spencer and I have talked about his new rankings for the season and really from a redraft perspective, right? So this is if you just do a new draft every single year, you lose your team or maybe you get 1 or 2 keepers, but for the most part, you're drafting. Now let's go into an area where dynasty leagues, where you can really get an advantage, and that's looking at the new crop of rookies. Who is going to come in and make an impact in year 1, like Jamar Chase did last year, like Kyle Pitts did to a certain extent last year, and then who is somebody to avoid and maybe let somebody else use a high pick on, or he's a couple years away, and so you don't necessarily want to take him. And Elliot led us right into it. What rookie running back should we be looking at? Here we go, rookie running backs from the draft, and this is kind of in rough order of how you prefer them.
Yeah, it's about the right order. That's pretty much how I have them ranked. Breece Hall, definitely my number 1 rookie, being a stepping into a good situation there at the Jets. As far as they've improved their offensive line, the committee there, I don't think will be too bad. Michael Carter, if anything, Michael Carter's best serve as a compliment. I mean, he was a compliment in college. Javonte Williams was the lead back at North Carolina, and Carter thrived in that complimentary role. So he can go back to that, and Breece Hall take over as the bruiser, the workhorse. He can catch passes as well. I think he's a very strong second running back with top 12 upside. And Kenneth Walker I like as well a lot in Seattle. I know the offense stinks, but he should see a lot of carries there with Rashad Penny being very injury prone. And we had some more news today with Chris Carson. Chris Carson, unfortunately, had to announce his retirement. The neck injury he suffered was, I guess, too severe for him to return to football. So no more Chris Carson there in Seattle. So Kenneth Walker should see a big workload right away. And we know that's a run-first team with old Pete Carroll. James Cook, Damian Pierce, I like their situations. Pierce is just not a whole lot of competition for carries outside of Marlon Mack, who's very injury-prone. And Cook, Devin Singletary's nothing special. So Cook, I definitely think will get in a lot on third downs and could even see some early down work in one of the best offenses in the league. And then Tyler Algier and Rashad White, like Algier's situation being that they don't have a whole lot there. It's kind of like with Pierce, he should see a lot of carries early on, not the best offense, but should see some volume. And then White's more the opposite. He's going to be behind Leonard Fournette, so might not see a whole lot of volume, but in that offense, he has a lot of upside, especially if he gets some goal line opportunities. And I feel like so far he's made a good impression there. Out of Tom Brady's kind of picky with rookies, but if White can get on his good side, then he's got a shot to be a bargain late in drafts.
And these are guys you could look at in a zero RB situation and really, Spencer, what you're talking about here is opportunity. It's like Najee Harris last year. I'm not sure Najee Harris is the most talented rookie running back last year. I think Javonte Williams might have been more talented. I think Michael Carter maybe, but Najee Harris he stepped in day one and got all the carries. And in fantasy, like I don't care if he's 10% less talented than Javonte Williams, he was getting 50% more carries. So do the math here. What do you want? You want Najee Harris, and that's Breece Hall is really a great example of talented and has an opportunity. Some of these other guys may not be as talented as he was, but they landed in spots where they're going to be asked to do a lot very quickly. And so that can be super valuable from a fantasy perspective. We'll do some rookie wide receivers. I remembered who I had in that championship team, my hero RB championship team. It was Terry McLaurin was my third wide receiver. So, McLaurin, Adams, Chase, you can win with that, especially, and Mixon obviously had a big year as well. And I had Burrow as my quarterback. And so, it was just as good as it could get. It was one of those set it and forget it lineups almost every single week. I think I had to worry about my flex and I Kyle Pitts at tight end. So I had to worry about my flex, and that was about it. So if every season could be that easy, boy, we would take it.
Yep.
Let's look at some guys who, speaking of Jamar Chase, is there a Jamar Chase out there this year? Talk about your rookie wide receivers. I have one of these guys that I particularly like.
Yeah, I wish there'd be a Jamar Chase. As much as I like Chris Olave, I can't go that far. I think Olave is going to have a great season. I think he'll crack the 1,000-yard mark, being that Jameis Winston loves to push the ball downfield, and feel like if anything, with no Sean Payton, the Saints might be a little more aggressive this year. It seemed like as Sean Payton got older as a coach, he got more conservative. So I feel like with Olave, his ceiling's through the roof there, and to me, he's the top rookie receiver out of these guys. Drake London's right up there with him, though. He's going to have a lot of opportunity in Atlanta. I know the QB situation is not that great, but outside of Kyle Pitts, he's got no real threat for targets, and he's a big body. Should see a lot of touchdowns, goal line opportunities. Trey Burks there, he's got a good opportunity too. It's just in that offense, not a whole lot of pass volume, and he's going to be competing with Robert Woods. Generally, only one receiver thrives over there. I know Woods is coming off an ACL, but if him and Tannehill develop a good rapport, it could be tough for Burks to see a whole lot of volume. Same thing with Garrett Wilson, being that the Jets have Elijah Moore, who had developed a good rapport with Zach Wilson down the stretch last year. So I think Garrett Wilson's very talented, but might take him a little while to get going. But Jalen Tolbert, somebody that, he wasn't a high pick like these guys, but he's in a great situation to produce right out of the chute there in Dallas. Because like I mentioned earlier, no more Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup coming off injury. I think Tolbert could find himself in a prime opportunity for targets there in a strong offense. And then Christian Watson, somebody that's, in a Packers system that is wide receiver needy. So those guys might get it because they're just in the right place in the right system.
Opportunity. That's what we're looking for with these rookies. Let them have some targets. Let them have some carries. Show what they can do. My guy off that list, Spencer, is Trey Burks. Loved him at Arkansas. I know that there was some questions and some controversy about his conditioning. That he's not in good shape. He didn't show up. Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? You know what it reminds me of, quite frankly, is the stuff about Jamar Chase's drops last preseason. You remember that he dropped like two rounds
his stock dropped. Yeah, his fantasy stock dropped after that.
I think he was just fine. I think.
Yeah.
and I think Trey Burks, he's got the whole training camp to get in shape, guys. I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, same thing with Leonard Fournette. I'm not worried about that.
It's a run-first offense in Tennessee, yes. And yes, Robert Woods is there now. I don't know. Robert Woods has been hurt. He's never really gotten the volume of a WR1 anyway. I just love Burks. He returned kicks at Arkansas. He's the type of guy who can catch a ball in traffic, but also catch it in space and make people miss. I just like everything about that guy. I think he dominated at a young age, which is always a good sign, similar to Jamar Chase, similar to Jalen Waddle, similar to Devonta Smith. So, I think the guy's the real deal, and I think the Titans knew what they were doing when they were willing to part with A.J. Brown to get this kid. And so I love Trey Burks. He's probably my favorite rookie out of the running backs or the receivers. We're going to wrap up with some injuries. Elliot does have one more question first. Late round flyers. Who do you like, Spencer? Who's a guy let's say 12th round or beyond that nobody's really thinking of, but you're stashing on a couple of your rosters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, as a running back, like Kenneth Gainwell is a late round flyer, especially in PPR leagues. He's a Eagles third down back, and Miles Sanders very injury prone. So where if Sanders would get hurt, Gainwell could be in for a big opportunity over there. And wide receivers, Sammy Watkins is somebody I like as a flyer. I know it's a name that most fantasy owners have completely crossed off their board, but going to Green Bay, I feel like at least early on, he could have a lot of big games. He's not someone that you want to invest in for the long term, but if you have him just, on your bench, and if you get an early injury, I think he's somebody that'll have a lot of big weeks early on. And I guess a more stable late round flyer receiver, somebody that you could probably keep all year, is Rondale Moore. I think he's going to do well. He'll have opportunity the first 6 weeks with no DeAndre Hopkins. And if he can carve out a steady role there in Arizona, I think he's somebody that's in for a big season.
I like Rondale Moore a lot, and I like where you're going with Sammy Watkins too. Somebody's got to catch passes from Aaron Rodgers. With Devontae Adams gone, with Marquez Valdez-Scantling gone, so somebody's got to do it. And Sammy Watkins is a veteran in the room. So let's talk about some injuries. And again, this is where you just got to keep up with the news cycle. Watch the Fantasy Roundup every Tuesday. We're going to be on every Tuesday afternoon from now through the end of the NFL season. Pay attention to your Twitter feed. Watch the news. Read The Advocate, Times-Picayune, because there will be updates on these guys. And if you get the update on your draft day and your league mates don't, guess who gets the advantage then? Guess who accidentally took somebody who's not fully recovered from his injury, or maybe risked him at a higher round than he should have? And dagnabbit, I did it again. I have Robert Woods with the Rams. So that's 2 mistakes today. Robert Woods is in Tennessee, going with the old teams. When you look at this list, are there some that you're more optimistic on than others, Spencer? I mean, obviously, we're still waiting for the news to drop from training camps. But who do you think is a good risk here?
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry is so far so good. I'd feel a little better about Henry than Cam Akers, because Cam Akers looked really bad in the postseason last year. He rushed back from that Achilles, and some people are scared that by doing that, he may have damaged it for the long term, where his Achilles might not ever be the same. And if that's the case, then his explosiveness won't be as good, and he might end up losing the job. So he's somebody that if all that's not true, if he's really healthy, then I love Cam Akers in that offense. But I'm a little wary about drafting him though, because he did look really bad last year coming back. And if he did
he was not the same guy.
Yeah, I mean, if he did long-term damage to that Achilles by, in my opinion, stupidly rushing back, just because he wanted to. I know he wanted to chip in toward the Super Bowl run, and they ended up winning it. But it wasn't because of him. If anything, he hurt him. He probably shouldn't have come back. And yeah, that was crazy. And then Travis Etienne, I really like him this year, and I think he's 100%. It looks like. I feel like he's gonna come back and have a huge year. Where J.K. Dobbins, though, he's on the PUP and not looking too good for JK as far as being back for week 1. There was a report that said he's probably going to start on the PUP list, but then he himself refuted it by saying, "No, my plan is to be back for week 1. Y'all need to check y'all sources." Like, he was like really.
We all make plans. We all make plans, man.
Exactly.
Just because you plan. Look, I think a rule of thumb is you got to see them play before you draft them. That's my, unless you're getting a super value because they just fell 3 or 4 rounds. Like, I made the mistake in my other league last year of drafting Michael Thomas, saying, "Oh, he's going to be back after 6 games." And I think I wasn't the only one. We had that question from Elliot earlier. He took him in the 6th round. Like, because you think, oh, when he comes back, I can plug him in as a high-level wide receiver 2, and he'll be great. Well, he never came back. And so my rule of thumb is if you don't see him play at least a series or 2 in the preseason, I'm not drafting him. I'm not, like, Michael Thomas, a good example. He's still on the PUP list. He's supposed to come back at some point in the preseason. If he doesn't, forget about it. I'll let somebody else take him. Maybe I'll get burned. J.K. Dobbins also. Maybe I'll get burned because he was just gearing up to be ready for week 1, and it'll be a medical marvel, and he'll do. But you know what? I'll take that chance. I'll get another good player at that spot who I know is healthy, and I'll take my chances.
Yeah, but then another one I'm not messing with is James Robinson, because at least with Travis Etienne, his injury occurred in the preseason last year, so he's had plenty of time to get back. Where James Robinson's injury occurred late in the regular season, so and it's an Achilles too. And I feel like he's probably rushing back to where I mean, we saw Cam Akers last year after he rushed back. It was ugly. And I don't see James Robinson being healthy. And he looks like they didn't even put him on the PUP list. Like he's determined to make it back. But I just think that's foolish. Like I think he's going to end up, I just don't like that. I feel like it's a player that I'm not touching. It's one of those ones that's like, I mean, he's a feel good story. You know, was he a late round pick, UDFA? You know, I wish him well, you know, from a real life perspective. I hope he comes back and does great. But as a fantasy manager, like I said earlier, Michael Thomas, it's just one of those, you got to make business decisions. And to me, it's just not a smart idea to draft a player coming off a major injury like that, especially one like Robinson that's trying to rush back.
Wise words from Spencer the Guru here on the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. And as I mentioned, we're going to be with you every Tuesday afternoon from now until the end of the NFL season, until the week after the Super Bowl. We're going to do waiver wire reports every Tuesday, who you should be targeting on your waiver wire. We're going to look back at the week before. We're going to look at some DFS plays, some high leverage DFS plays for every week. And in the preseason, look, we'll talk some auction strategy. We'll go through rankings. We'll follow the training camp news. We'll keep you up to date on that. And we're also going to get into some prop bets this year, Spencer. So we got a lot going on.
Yep, we sure do. Yeah, then one more note about the injuries. You know, Godwin, he's another one. His injury occurred pretty late in the season, and I know he got cleared for camp, but I'd be a little wary about drafting Chris Godwin, because like we said earlier with Tampa Bay, a lot of mouths to feed over there, and if they might ease him back a little bit to where, you know, with Julio there, Godwin might not see, even if he's there for week one, he might not see the same allotment of snaps. So just because he's cleared, I wouldn't go reaching for him either. I would say unless he would fall to like the 7th or 8th round, I'm not drafting him.
Absolutely. I like that. I don't like taking a bunch of risks unless you're in a real deep league. If you're in a real deep league, maybe it's worth it, because to win that league, you've got to have something special happen. But if you're in a 10 or 12 team kind of standard fantasy football league, there's plenty of good players out there. Don't roll the dice on somebody if they're not healthy. Don't do it. And by the way, every year in the first 3 or 4 weeks, the waiver wire is chock full of guys who end up being league winners, like Cordero Patterson was last year. I mean, you know, Elijah Mitchell, just as a couple of examples. Joe Burrow was on some waiver wires early last year. Like, these guys are out there because they're good players, but we're not sure, and even those of us who follow it for a living, like, we're not sure what goes on behind closed doors at training camps. We're not sure exactly what each team's got. And of course, there's no way to predict all of the injuries. So you just take your chances. So that will do it for us for our first edition of the Fantasy Roundup for the 2022 football season. Glad you could be with us. We'll see you next Tuesday. We'll also see you live here on these same channels, 4 p.m. Thursday, for our latest edition of Bayou Bets. We'll be joined by Jim Derry. We're going to be talking a lot of AFC West. We'll also talk some baseball and college football on that day. So for Spencer the Guru Urquhart, I'm Zach Ewing. Have a good one, everybody.